This is Precalculus Concept 7D. We're going to talk about describing function behavior and jump in with a few terms that are new, although you did see these on your summer assignment as well. So the question here is going to be describe the interval for where a function is increasing or decreasing and the relative max and relative min. So these are four terms you want to understand pretty well. So these problems are actually very easy, but people sometimes have trouble with representing their answer in a certain way. So if I ask you to look at this graph and tell me where it's increasing, hopefully it makes sense to you that it's increasing anywhere where the graph has a positive slope. So this section and this section are examples where the graph is increasing. So pointing to them is pretty easy, but describing them is, again, the part that's slightly challenging. This is another great time to use interval notation. So I'm going to give the x values, that's the important thing, the x values for which the function is increasing. So if you notice, the graph goes forever to the left, and it's going to be increasing the whole time until you get to the number 2, negative 2 rather, and that's where you stop increasing. And then you have a second interval which starts at positive 2 and keeps going forever. Right? We use a union symbol between those two to say that the graph is increasing on both intervals, negative infinity to negative 2 and 2 to infinity. Alright, let's look at decreasing. If I took a look at this graph and I ask you what seems to be the places where this is decreasing, then you might look at this and say, well, it appears that it's decreasing from here to here. Right? And so my decreasing interval, let me do that in green, would be, again, reading the graph from left to right, giving the x values, it's going to be decreasing from negative 2 to positive 2. Okay? People often want to bring in the y values when answering these questions. You don't do that. You simply are describing a little interval for which the graph is increasing. So once again, increasing means positive slope, decreasing means negative slope. When you're asked to find the relative maximum, maximum is, as you might think, a high point. Relative maximum means it might not be the highest point, but it's the highest point in its area. So if you look at the graph over here, that value of 7.667 is definitely a high point. Later on you go higher, right? But we call that a relative maximum because that is the highest point in its area. So there's a relative max at 6.667, and by the same argument there's a relative minimum at negative 3. You can answer these with the coordinates of the point if you want, but the relative max and relative min are really asking you for the y value at a local high point and a local low point. Alright, let's try you try. Here's a picture of a graph. I want you to simply answer for what values is the function decreasing. Alright, so what I'm looking for here is the section where I'm decreasing, and if you read the graph from left to right, you don't start decreasing until x equals 1, and you stop decreasing when x equals 3. By the way, if you were thinking of 1 is less than or equal to x, which is less than or equal to 3, or rather, sorry, just less than, strictly less than, that is also a different way of representing the answer that is also correct. This first one is called interval notation, the second one is just using inequalities. Right? Alright, there's another thing that you saw on your summer assignment, which is describing the interval where a function is positive or negative. So again, I'm looking for specific things on the graph. When I ask for the interval for which the function is greater than or equal to 0, our hope is you could see and think about that section of the graph. And so if I wanted to answer that with the proper interval, I don't start becoming positive until negative 6, and I don't stop becoming positive, or I'm not stop positive until I get to 2. And anywhere on that interval, the function is above 0. If I look at a different interval, pick a different color here. And do the same thing. Places where the function is negative would be this section and this section. And since those are two different sections, I have to answer this question with two different intervals. Notice the strictly less than symbol right there, which means that I only want to give the values below 0, not when it equals 0. So I'm going to say from negative infinity up until negative 6, but not including negative 6, because if I included negative 6, I would be equal to 0. Okay, once again, I'll do the union symbol, and then my second interval starts just after 2, so I do parentheses 2, and goes to infinity. Alright, so those are the intervals where the graph is positive and where the graph is negative. Let's finish up with the U-try. You've got a picture here, and the question says, describe the values of x for which the function is less than or equal to 0. Alright, hopefully you recognize two different intervals there. One of them went from negative infinity to negative 3. I put a bracket here on the negative 3 because negative 3 would equal 0, and so I want to include that because my question has a less than or equal to sign. Alright, the other place where the graph is less than or equal to 0 is that second section, which is the interval from 0 to 3, including 0 and 3.